The smoke had finally cleared, but Marcus Rivera couldn't bring himself to look at what remained. 3 days had passed since the wildfire tore through the valley, turning everything he'd built over 30 years into ash and memory. The insurance adjuster had come and gone, shaking his head, mumbling about total loss and inadequate coverage. His neighbors had stopped by with casseroles and sympathy, their eyes carrying that mixture of pity and relief that their own homes had been spared. Now, standing at the end of the dirt road that led to his ranch, Marcus felt the weight of 58 years pressing down on his shoulders. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The wind carried the acrid smell of burned wood and dreams. His truck sat idling behind him, packed with the few belongings he'd managed to grab before evacuating some clothes, his late wife, Elena's jewelry box, and a photograph of their daughter Sofia on her wedding day. He should have been driving away, heading to his daughter's house in the city where a spare bedroom waited. Instead, his boots carried him forward, crunching over the blackened ground, pulled by something he couldn't name. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was the need to see with his own eyes what the fire had stolen. Or perhaps it was the faint whisper of his father's voice, carried on the wind from decades past. The land always remembers, mijo, even when everything else forgets. The main house was gone, where Elena had hung her herb garden, where Sofia had taken her first steps, where 3 generations had gathered for Sunday dinners. Nothing remained but a stone chimney rising from the rubble like a grave marker. The barn had collapsed inward, its red paint reduced to memories. The pastures that once held cattle stretched out in every direction, transformed into a lunar landscape of grey and black. Marcus walked through it all, his heart breaking with each step. The oak tree where he'd proposed to Elena, reduced to a charred stump. He stopped there, running his fingers over the blackened wood, remembering the day he'd carved their initials into the bark. M.R.+E. M. Forever. The letters were gone now, consumed by flames that had shown no mercy to memories or promises. He moved on to the workshop where he'd built Sofia's crib. The walls had collapsed, but he could still make out where his workbench had stood. He'd spent 3 months on that crib, sanding each piece until it was smooth as silk, carving tiny stars into the headboard, because Elena had said their daughter would reach for the heavens. Sofia had slept in that crib for 2 years, and then they'd stored it in the attic, hoping for grandchildren who might use it someday. The chicken coop was nothing but twisted wire and ash, the tool shed gone. The small chapel Elena had insisted on building after her mother died. Its walls had stood for 20 years, holding prayers and hopes and Sunday morning hymns. Now only the stone foundation remained, a rectangle of rock marking, where faith had once gathered. Marcus found himself walking toward the back pasture, where the old cottonwood tree had shaded the creek. Elena used to bring lunch out here during harvest season, spreading a blanket under the branches, while he and the hired hands took their break. She'd pack tamales and fresh tortillas, and they'd eat in the dappled shade, listening to the water burble over stones. The tree was a skeleton now, its branches like accusing fingers pointed at the sky. The creek bed was dry, choked with ash. He sank to his knees there, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of the loss. His hands dug into the ash, and he found himself speaking aloud, words tumbling out that he hadn't planned to say. "I don't know what to do, Elena," he whispered. "You always knew what to do. When the drought came in '09, you said we'd plant differently. When the market crashed in '12, you said we'd diversify. But this, how do I come back from this?" The wind was his only answer, stirring the ash into small grey clouds that drifted across the dead land. He stood slowly, his knees protesting, and continued his survey of the devastation. Every step revealed another loss, another memory turned to carbon. The irrigation system he'd installed 5 years ago melted. The solar panels he'd been so proud of shattered. The fence posts that marked the property line burned to nubs. He found himself at the old stone well, the one structure that seemed to have survived. His grandfather had built it in 1947, using river stones he'd carried up from the canyon, one by one, over the course of a summer. Marcus remembered the story how his grandfather had insisted on doing it himself, refusing help, saying that a man had to know his land stone by stone, handful by handful. The wooden roof that had covered it was gone, burned away. But the circular stone wall still stood, blackened but intact. Marcus leaned against it, feeling the rough stone against his palms. It was still warm from the fire. He looked down into the darkness and saw nothing. The bucket and rope had burned away. For a moment, he considered dropping a stone, listening for the splash that would tell him if water still remained below. But what did it matter? Water couldn't bring back what the fire had taken. The sound of an engine made him look up. A beat-up pickup truck was pulling onto the property, dust and ash rising behind it. Marcus recognized it immediately. Harold Jensen, his neighbor from 3 miles east. Harold climbed out slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. "Marcus," Harold called, approaching with cautious steps. "Didn't expect to see you out here so soon." "Didn't expect to be here," Marcus admitted. Harold reached the well and stood beside him, surveying the devastation in silence. They'd been neighbors for 23 years, had helped each other through droughts and losses, had buried their wives within 6 months of each other. Harold understood what words couldn't say. "Lost my storage barn," Harold said finally, "and about 40 acres of good pasture. But the house stood. The fire jumped right over it, like it had someplace more important to be. It found my place," Marcus said. "That it did." Harold pulled a thermos from his jacket pocket. "Brought coffee. Figured you could use some." They sat on the edge of the well, passing the thermos back and forth, watching the afternoon sun paint the burned landscape in shades of amber and gold. The light was beautiful, which somehow made the devastation worse. "You going to rebuild?" Harold asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. The question felt too big, too heavy. "Sofia wants me to move to the city. Says there's nothing left here worth staying for. Kids always think they know best," Harold said without judgment. "My daughter says the same thing. Says I should sell what's left and move into one of those senior communities where they have activities and nurses and whatnot." He spat into the ash. "But this land, it's not just property, is it?" "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not. Your grandfather built this well by hand," Harold continued, patting the stone. "My grandfather helped survey the property line between our places. That's history. That's blood and sweat and memory. You don't just walk away from that because the fire came through. The fire took everything, Harold." "Did it?" Harold looked at him directly. "You're still here. The land's still here. That well still stands. Seems to me the fire took things, sure, but it didn't take everything." A truck engine rumbled in the distance, different from Harold's. Marcus turned to see his daughter's SUV bouncing down the dirt road, creating small clouds of ash with each tire rotation. Sofia parked near his truck and climbed out, her face tight with concern. When she saw Harold, her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Jensen," she said, nodding politely. "Sofia," Harold replied. "Good to see you, though I wish the circumstances were better." "Dad," Sofia said, walking toward Marcus. "You said you were just coming to look. You've been here for hours. Had it been that long?" Time felt strange in this place, stretched thin like smoke. "Harold brought coffee," Marcus said, as if that explained everything. Sofia's eyes moved between the two old men, then out across the devastation. Her expression was a mixture of sorrow and frustration. "Papa, please, let's just go. Miguel and the kids are waiting. We've got the spare room, all ready for you. There's nothing more you can do here today." "This was your great-grandfather's land," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Roberto came here with nothing, built everything from scratch. I know the stories, Dad." Sofia's hand found his arm, gentle but insistent. "If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But it's gone now. And you can't stay here. There's no house, no water. No, there's water, Marcus interrupted, nodding toward the well. This well has never run dry. Not in 70 years. Not in drought of 56. Not in 2002 when every other well in the valley went dry. It's still here. Sofia glanced at the stone structure skeptically. Maybe. But what good is water when everything else is ash? Marcus didn't have an answer for that. She was right, of course. Practical, like her mother had been. Elena would have said the same thing, mourn what's lost, then move forward. Don't cling to ashes when life still waits ahead. Give him tonight, Harold said quietly to Sofia. A man needs to say goodbye on his own terms. Sofia looked at Harold, then back at her father. Dad, there's nowhere to sleep. You can't just… I've got sleeping bags in the truck, Marcus said. I'll be fine. Please, Mija. One more night. Sofia struggled with it. He could see the worry and frustration warring in her expression. She'd already lost her mother. The thought of losing her father, too, even to stubbornness, terrified her. But she also knew that when Marcus Rivera made up his mind about something, arguing only made him dig in deeper. Finally, she sighed. One night, but I'm calling you first thing in the morning. And if you don't answer, I'm driving back here. Deal. She hugged him tightly before leaving, whispering in his ear. Mama wouldn't want you to give up, but she wouldn't want you to destroy yourself either. Please be careful. Marcus watched her SUV disappear down the road, trailing ash dust behind it. Harold stood, stretched his back, and handed Marcus the thermos. Keep the coffee, he said. And Marcus? The well standing. That means something. Don't forget that. After Harold left, the silence settled in, complete and profound. No cattle lowing. No chickens clucking. No Elena humming in the kitchen. No sounds of life at all. Just the wind, carrying the scent of loss across the dead land, and the faint creak of the well stones settling as the day's heat dissipated. As evening approached, Marcus set up a simple camp near the well. A sleeping bag, a small camping stove, a lantern. He heated a can of soup and ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red, colors that reminded him too much of fire. He looked away, focusing instead on the darkening eastern horizon. He thought about Harold's words. The well standing meant something. But what? That stone endured when wood burned. That his grandfather had built something stronger than flame? Or was there a deeper message in the well's survival, something about foundations and what truly matters? Night came quickly, as it always did in the valley. The stars emerged, brilliant and indifferent. Marcus lay in his sleeping bag, staring up at the vast darkness above, and felt smaller than he ever had. The land that had defined his entire life, that had held his history and his identity, was gone. What was he now? A man without a place, a rancher without a ranch, a widower without a home. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of fire and the sound of Elena's laughter mixing with the crackle of flames. He woke several times, disoriented, reaching for her in the darkness, before remembering. Each time, the silence pressed down harder, a physical weight on his chest. It was during one of these half-awake moments, somewhere in the deep hours before dawn when the world is darkest and dreams bleed into reality, that he heard it. A sound so faint, he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. A splash. Then another. Coming from the well. Marcus sat up, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. The sound came again definitely from the well, but that made no sense. The bucket was gone. Nothing could be falling into the water, and yet the sound persisted, rhythmic now, like something moving deliberately through water. He grabbed his lantern and walked to the well's edge, his boots crunching on the ash-covered ground. The light pushed back the darkness, revealing the stone walls descending into shadow. He listened intently. There another splash, followed by what sounded like movement, water sloshing against stone with unusual force. "Hello?" His voice felt foolish in the darkness. "Is someone down there?" Silence. Then, more splashing, more insistent this time. And beneath it, a new sound, a low rumble, like distant thunder trapped underground. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. An animal that had fallen in during the fire, but the old wooden cover would have protected it until it burned. That cover had only burned away 3 days ago. Nothing could have survived in the well that long without food. Could it? The splashing intensified. Water was definitely moving down there, far more vigorously than it should in a sealed well. Marcus thought about underground springs, about how heat from fire could affect water tables, about pressure building in sealed spaces. The fire had been hot enough to melt metal. What might it have done to the earth beneath the ranch? He needed to see. He needed to know. In the truck, he found rope and a flashlight. His hands shook slightly as he worked from cold, from exhaustion, from something he couldn't quite name. Fear? Anticipation? He couldn't tell anymore. Back at the well, he tied one end of the rope around his waist and the other to the truck's trailer hitch. It would hold his weight if he needed to climb down. The well was about 30 feet deep. He remembered his father telling him that, remembered watching as a boy, while his father and grandfather cleaned it out every spring. Marcus tested the rope's tension, then swung his legs over the stone wall. For a moment, he hesitated. This was dangerous. He was 58 years old, exhausted, alone in the dark. If something went wrong, no one would find him until Sofia arrived in the morning. She'd never forgive him. But the splashing continued, and with it, that low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. Something had changed down there. The fire had changed it. And Marcus needed to understand what. He began to descend, using the rough stones as handholds and footholds. The flashlight hung from his belt, swinging wildly, casting crazy shadows on the circular walls. His muscles protested he wasn't a young man anymore, but adrenaline pushed him downward. The air grew cooler as he descended, damper. He could hear water below now, definitely water, moving with more force than seemed natural for an enclosed well. The sound echoed strangely off the stones, creating a chorus of splashes and gurgles that didn't quite make sense. His boot touched something solid but not stone. Wood. He aimed his flashlight downward and froze, his breath catching in his throat. There was a platform, about 10 feet above the waterline. Someone had built a wooden platform inside the well, supported by beams wedged into the stone walls. And on that platform sat a large metal chest, partially submerged in water that seemed to be bubbling up from below with unusual force, spilling over the platform's edges and creating the splashing sounds he'd heard. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This made no sense. He'd helped his father clean this well a dozen times growing up. There had never been a platform, never been a chest. The well had been empty except for water, he was certain of it. Unless the platform had been deeper, unless it had been fully submerged, hidden beneath the normal waterline, and the fire's heat, penetrating deep into the earth, had somehow affected the water table, causing pressure to build and water to surge upward with unusual force. That surge could have raised the water level, bringing the hidden platform into view. He lowered himself onto the platform, which creaked but held. The wood was old, but solid cypress or cedar, something that could withstand water. The chest was older still, covered in rust and decorated with Spanish colonial-style metalwork that caught the flashlight beam. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, but the lock itself had rusted through, its shackle barely holding. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled the lock free. It broke apart in his fingers, pieces of rust crumbling into the water below. He set down the flashlight, positioning it so it illuminated the chest, and lifted the lid. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound that echoed up the well shaft and out into the night. The lid rose slowly, revealing gold, Even in the dim light of his flashlight, the contents gleamed with an inner fire. Gold coins, stacks of them, wrapped in rotted cloth. Beneath those, leather pouches that clinked with the sound of more coins when he touched them. Beneath those, items wrapped in oilcloth. He pulled one free with shaking fingers and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a solid gold crucifix, encrusted with emeralds and rubies that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. Marcus's breath came in short gasps. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to men like him. Treasures were for stories, for movies, for other people's lives. Not for a 58-year-old rancher standing in an old well at 3 a.m, surrounded by the ashes of everything he'd ever built. His hands moved of their own accord, rifling through more of the chest's contents. More gold coins, Spanish colonial pieces with the Pillars of Hercules, Mexican pesos from the 1800s, bearing the eagle and serpent, American double eagles with Lady Liberty's profile, jewelry rings set with diamonds and sapphires, necklaces of twisted gold, bracelets engraved with names and dates he couldn't quite make out in the dim light, documents in sealed leather cases, their oilcloth wrappings still intact. The beam of his flashlight caught more items deeper in the chest, small bars of silver stamped with assayer's marks, a jeweled dagger with a mother-of-pearl handle, what looked like old Spanish land grants, written in elaborate script. The water continued to bubble and splash around the platform's supports. Marcus realized that the fire's heat must have penetrated deep into the earth, far deeper than seemed possible. The valley sat above an underground aquifer. His grandfather had told him that, had explained how the well tapped into water that came down from the mountains through layers of porous rock. The fire's heat could have caused that water to expand, building pressure, forcing it upward with enough power to dislodge soil and rocks that had concealed this platform for how long? Decades? Longer? His flashlight beam caught something carved into the wooden platform near his foot. He knelt, careful not to overbalance, and brushed away the water. Letters, carved deep into the wood, dark with age and water staining. R. Rivera, 1893. Roberto Rivera, his great-grandfather. The man who had first claimed this land, who had arrived from Mexico with nothing, and somehow purchased 500 acres, when most settlers were still squatting and hoping. Marcus sat back hard, his mind reeling. The family stories came flooding back. Stories he'd heard as a child but had always dismissed as exaggeration or myth. Roberto Rivera had come to this valley during the Mexican Revolution, fleeing violence in Sonora. He'd arrived with nothing, the stories said, but had somehow purchased this land outright, paying cash when cash was scarce and land was sold cheap to anyone willing to work it. The family had always assumed Roberto had saved money over years of work, perhaps had sold property in Mexico before fleeing. But this was something else entirely. This was wealth beyond anything a simple rancher could accumulate through honest labor. This was treasure. This was fortune. This was someone else's gold, someone else's jewels, someone else's history sealed in a chest and hidden in a well, marked with his great-grandfather's name, and the year he'd claimed the land. Had Roberto stolen it? Found it? Been entrusted with it? The questions spun through Marcus's mind, but no answers came. Only more questions, and the steady splash of water rising from below, and the gleam of gold in the darkness. He didn't know how long he sat there, stunned into immobility. Time had ceased to mean anything. Finally, the cold water seeping into his boots brought him back to himself. He was sitting in a well on a platform that was over 100 years old, surrounded by a fortune that shouldn't exist, while above him, the first hints of dawn were probably beginning to paint the sky. He needed to get out, needed to think, needed to understand what this meant. Marcus climbed back up the well with shaking limbs, his mind unable to process what he'd found. When he reached the top, He sat on the stone wall, breathing hard, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The eastern sky was indeed beginning to lighten pre-dawn grey, replacing the black of night. He'd come here to say goodbye to a dead ranch. Instead, he'd found a reason to rebuild everything. But the weight of it terrified him. This wasn't just money. This was history, legacy. It was his great-grandfather's secret, preserved through fire and time, handed down not through words, but through survival. The survival of a well that never ran dry, that stood when everything else burned, that held fast to its secrets until the moment was right to reveal them. As the sun rose over the devastated landscape, Marcus Rivera stood and looked out over his land with new eyes. The ash-covered fields suddenly seemed less like an ending and more like a blank page. The destroyed buildings were no longer losses but space for new construction. The burned pastures were cleared ground, ready for replanting. The fire had taken everything. Yes, but in taking everything, it had revealed what had been waiting below, waiting for him, waiting for this moment, waiting for the fire that would force the earth to give up its secrets. He pulled out his tanned phone and called Sofia. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and worry. "Dad, are you okay? It's 6 in the morning." "I'm fine, mija," Marcus said, and for the first time in days, he meant it. "I'm better than fine. But I need you to come back to the ranch, right now, and bring Miguel. I need to show you something." "Dad." "What?" "Please, trust me. This is important. This is—" He paused, looking down at the well. "This is everything." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "We'll be there in an hour." Marcus spent that hour pacing, unable to sit still, unable to process what he'd found. He made coffee on his camping stove, his hands still trembling, spilling grounds across the ash-covered ground. He tried to eat, but couldn't. His stomach was twisted in knots of anticipation and disbelief. When Sofia's SUV finally appeared, followed by Harold Jensen's truck, Sofia must have called him. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone with this anymore. They gathered by the well, all of them. Sofia and Miguel, Harold and Marcus. The morning sun painted everything golden, making even the devastation look somehow hopeful. "Papa, what's going on?" Sofia asked. "You sounded strange on the phone. Mr. Jensen says you called him too." "I needed witnesses," Marcus said. I found something. In the well. Something your great-great-grandfather left behind." He led them to the edge and pointed down. "There's a platform down there. And a chest. I need help bringing it up." Miguel, younger and stronger, volunteered to descend. Marcus talked him through it. And 20 minutes later, they were hauling the chest up using ropes and the truck's winch. The metal groaned as it rose, water streaming from its sides, ancient wood creaking in protest. When it finally sat on the ground beside the well, dripping and covered in rust, everyone stared in silence. "What is that?" Sofia whispered. Marcus opened the lid. The morning sun hit the contents, and the gold seemed to explode with light. Sofia gasped. Miguel swore softly in Spanish. Harold removed his hat, holding it to his chest as if in the presence of something sacred. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. Is that real?" Sofia finally managed. "I think so," Marcus said. "I haven't had it appraised. But yes, I think it's real." Sofia knelt beside the chest, carefully touching a gold coin. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers, reading the Spanish inscription. "Papa, there must be. How much is this worth?" "I don't know. Hundreds of thousands. Maybe millions. It depends on the historical value, the purity, the rarity of the coins." Marcus's voice was steady now, his initial shock settling into cautious wonder. "Your great-great-grandfather hid this. The fire brought up water that revealed it." Miguel pulled out one of the sealed document cases. "Should we open these?" "Carefully," Marcus said. Inside, the leather case were papers brittle, yellowed, but preserved by the oilcloth wrapping and the seal. Miguel, who taught history at the community college, handled them with the reverence they deserved. He squinted at the old Spanish script, his lips moving as he translated. These are, oh my God, these are land grants. Original Spanish colonial land grants dating back to 1789. And this, he shuffled to another document. This is a deed of sale from 1893. Roberto Rivera purchased this land for $5,000 gold. $5,000 paid in full. In 1893, that was a fortune. He continued reading, his voice growing more excited. And here, this is a receipt for the safe deposit of certain valuable items in trust, dated 1892, from a bank in Hermosillo, Mexico. It's signed by 3 men, Roberto Rivera and 2 others, whose names I can't quite make out. Harold leaned in to look. What's it mean? It means, Miguel said slowly, his historian's mind piecing together the story, that your great-great-grandfather wasn't a thief. He was entrusted with this treasure, probably by wealthy families fleeing the revolution. They gave him their valuables to keep safe, and he hid them here, in this well, in this land he'd just purchased. But something must have happened. He either died before he could return the items, or the families who owned them were killed in the revolution, and the secret died with him. Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't known was there. Roberto Rivera had been a good man, a trusted man. The family honor remained intact. His great-grandfather hadn't been a thief or a treasure hunter. He'd been a guardian, chosen by friends to protect what they valued most. So, what do we do? Sofia asked, looking between her father and husband. Marcus looked out over his burned land, then down at the chest full of gold and history. The answer came to him clearly, as if Elena were standing beside him, whispering in his ear. We honor his trust. He said quietly, we find out who these families were. If any descendants remain, we return what we can, and what we can't return. He paused, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. We use to rebuild, not just the ranch, the whole valley, everyone who lost everything in the fire. Sofia's eyes filled with tears. Papa, your mother always said the land takes care of those who take care of it. Marcus continued. This ranch has taken care of 4 generations of Riveras. Now it's given us the means to take care of others. That's what Elena would have wanted. That's what Roberto would have wanted. Harold cleared his throat roughly. That's damn fine thinking, Marcus. Damn fine. You need help with any of this. You just say the word. The practical discussions came later. Phone calls to lawyers, historians, and appraisers. Visits from university professors and representatives from Mexican cultural heritage organizations. News crews, who wanted to tell the story of the stolen treasure revealed by fire. The ranch became, for a brief time, the center of attention. Cameras and reporters, historians and treasure hunters, curiosity seekers, and the genuinely interested. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, focused on what mattered. He worked with Miguel to research the history of the treasure, to track down the families who had entrusted their wealth to Roberto Rivera. The appraisals took weeks. Experts came with scales and microscopes, catalogs and reference books. They photographed each item, documented each piece, traced the provenance of coins that had traveled from Spanish mints in Mexico City and Lima to this small well in a California valley. The final total was staggering, including the historical value of the coins, jewelry, and documents. The treasure was worth approximately $8.7 million. Some items, particularly the Spanish colonial pieces and the religious artifacts, were deemed culturally significant and were returned to Mexican museums. The Rivera family received finder's fees and recognition for their stewardship, for protecting what had been entrusted to their ancestor. Through genealogical research and historical records, they tracked down 3 families in Mexico whose ancestors had entrusted wealth to Roberto Rivera. The reunions were emotional, tearful affairs. Marcus traveled to Mexico City to meet with the descendants of the Ortega family, to Guadalajara to meet the Mendoza family, to Hermosillo to meet the Castillo family. Each meeting was the same disbelief, tears, gratitude, and amazement that Roberto Rivera had kept faith across more than a century. Each family received their portion, and each insisted that Marcus keep a significant percentage as thanks for his great-grandfather's integrity and his own honesty. They could have kept everything, they said. The law would have supported it. But he had chosen honor over wealth, and that meant something. What remained still? Several $million. Marcus used exactly as he'd promised. He rebuilt his ranch, but not extravagantly. A simple house, but well built, with solar panels and modern insulation. A modern barn with equipment that would last decades. New fencing that followed the old property lines his grandfather had surveyed. He invested in sustainable ranching practices, in water conservation systems that would protect the valley for future generations. And he established the Elena Rivera Foundation, named after his wife, to help other families in the valley rebuild after the fire. The foundation provided interest-free loans and direct grants to those who had lost the most. It funded the reconstruction of the small church where Elena had sung in the choir. It helped reopen the community center where Sofia had learned to dance. It brought life back to a valley that the fire had tried to kill. The story spread far beyond the valley. News outlets called it a miracle, how fire had revealed hidden treasure, how loss had transformed into renewal, how one man's integrity had created ripples that touched hundreds of lives. But Marcus knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the land keeping its promise. The earth always remembers, his father had said, even when everything else forgets. 6 months after the fire, Sofia and Miguel brought their children to visit the rebuilt ranch. The kids ran through the new grass, chasing butterflies that had returned to the valley, their laughter echoing across the fields. Marcus stood by the well, now properly restored, with a new wooden roof and fresh bucket, watching them play. "You did it, Papa," Sofia said, standing beside him. "You brought it back." Marcus shook his head slightly. "The land did it. I just listened." "Do you think great-great-grandfather knew?" Sofia asked. "Do you think he knew that someday the ranch would need what he hid?" "I think he knew the land would provide when it was needed," Marcus said. "He trusted the earth to remember. And it did." That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Marcus walked through his new fields. The cattle grazed peacefully. He'd restocked with a small herd, manageable for a man his age. Chickens scratched in their coop, content and productive. Smoke rose from the chimney of the new house. Sofia was cooking dinner, filling the air with the scent of Elena's recipes, passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. The sound of children laughing drifted on the warm breeze. He reached the well and placed both hands on the sun-warmed stones. "Thank you," he whispered to his great-grandfather, "to the land, to Elena, to the fire that had destroyed and the water that had revealed. Thank you for remembering, thank you for waiting, thank you for knowing that we'd need this when everything else was gone." The well whispered back with the sound of water moving deep below, cool and constant and eternal. And Marcus understood, finally, what his father had been trying to teach him all those years ago. The land doesn't just remember, the land provides. Not always in the ways we expect, not always when we think we need it, but always, always when the time is right. The fire had come to take everything. Instead, it had uncovered what had been waiting all along. Not just treasure, but truth. Not just wealth, but legacy. Not just gold, but the golden thread that connected past to present, loss to renewal, ash to life. The valley had been tested by fire and had answered with water. The well had endured when everything else fell. And in that endurance lay the deepest treasure of all the knowledge that some things cannot be destroyed, only transformed. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus walked back toward the house where lights glowed warm in the windows. Behind him, the well stood silent and strong, guardian of secrets and provider of life, exactly as it had been for 70 years, exactly as it would be for 70 more. But the story didn't end with that sunset. The true transformation was only beginning, spreading outward from the well, like ripples on water, touching lives that Marcus couldn't yet imagine. 3 months later, on a cool autumn morning, a man named Thomas Blackwood stood at the gate of the Rivera ranch, his hands gripping the metal bars as he stared at the rebuilt structures. He was 72 years old, lean and weathered, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. His truck sat idling behind him, Arizona plates dusty from the long drive. Marcus noticed him from the barn and walked over, curious. Visitors still came occasionally, tourists wanting to see the Miracle Ranch, as the media had dubbed it. Usually, Marcus politely redirected them, but something about this man's expression stopped him from doing so. There was recognition in those eyes, and pain, and hope. "Can I help you?" Marcus called as he approached. Thomas turned to face him fully. "You're Marcus Rivera?" "I am. My name is Thomas Blackwood. My grandmother was Carmen Blackwood, born Carmen Ortega. I believe." He paused, his voice catching. "I believe your great-grandfather knew her family." Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. They'd found most of the families connected to the treasure, but not all. Some trails had gone cold, lost in the chaos of revolution and migration, scattered across borders and generations. "Come in," he said, opening the gate. "Please." They sat on the porch of the new house, and Thomas told his story. His grandmother, Carmen, had fled Mexico in 1913 with her mother and sister, leaving behind their father and 2 brothers who stayed to fight in the revolution. Before leaving, her father had entrusted the family's jewelry, 5 generations worth, pieces that had been passed down from mothers to daughters since the colonial period, to a man he trusted implicitly, a man named Roberto Rivera. "My grandmother talked about it sometimes when I was young," Thomas said, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug Sofia had brought out. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis, spotted with age, but they held the mug with surprising steadiness. She said her father told her, "If anything happens to us, find Roberto Rivera in the valley beyond the mountains. He has our family's heart." But she never did. She was afraid to come back, afraid of what she might find. Both her brothers died in the fighting. Her father disappeared. When she finally tried to locate Roberto Rivera in the 1950 seconds, she learned he'd passed away years earlier. She assumed the jewelry was lost forever. "She never knew about this ranch?" Marcus asked. Thomas shook his head. "She knew he'd gone to a valley. But there are many valleys. She searched for a while, but without internet, without proper records, without anyone who remembered. She eventually gave up. She died 10 years ago, still mourning the loss of her family's history." "But you kept searching," Marcus said quietly. "I did. When the story of your discovery hit the news, something about it rang familiar. The name Rivera, the valley, the Spanish colonial jewelry, the year 1893. I pulled out my grandmother's papers, and..." Thomas reached into his jacket and removed a worn leather folder. Inside was a yellowed photograph, creased but clear. The photograph showed a young woman, Carmen, beautiful and serious, standing next to a man Marcus recognized from his own family photos. Roberto Rivera, younger than Marcus had ever imagined him, standing tall and proud. They stood in front of a partially built stone structure. "The well. She came here," Marcus breathed. "She visited the ranch in 1891 before she left Mexico." Thomas confirmed. "My great-grandfather and Roberto were friends from childhood. They grew up in the same village in Sonora. Roberto was building his well, and they came to see his new land, to celebrate his success." My great-grandfather joked that Roberto was building his fortune on water and stone. Thomas's smile was bittersweet. He had no idea how literally true that would become. Marcus called Sofia, and together they spent the afternoon going through the documented items that had been found. Among them was a set of jewelry that matched descriptions in Carmen's diary. A gold locket with a painted miniature of the Virgin of Guadalupe. A man's ring with the Ortega family crest, intricately engraved, and a necklace of twisted gold that had belonged to Carmen's grandmother, made in Spain in 1778. When Thomas saw the locket, he broke down completely. His weathered face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She never stopped talking about this," he said through tears. "Her mother wore it every day. It was supposed to be passed to her on her quinceañera, but they had to flee before the celebration could happen. She carried the memory of it for 80 years, carried the weight of it never being passed down. The legal work took time, but eventually, the Ortega family's items were released." To Thomas, the historical value was significant. The pieces were worth nearly $300,000. Thomas initially refused any payment beyond the jewelry itself. But Marcus insisted, following the same formula they'd used with other families. Finally, Thomas accepted a $50,000 finder's fee. What he did with it surprised everyone. Thomas used the money to establish a scholarship fund for students from immigrant families studying history or cultural preservation. "My grandmother spent her whole life caught between two worlds," he explained at the fund's launch event, which was held at the community center the Elena Rivera Foundation had helped rebuild. Mexico and America, past and future. She wanted young people to understand that you don't have to choose. You can honor both. You can carry your history forward while building your future. The scholarship was named after Carmen Ortega Blackwood, and its first recipient was Sofia's oldest daughter, Maria, who wanted to study archaeology and Mexican-American history. The day Thomas left to return to Arizona, he stood with Marcus by the well one final time. The afternoon sun was warm, and the valley spread out before them, green and alive again. In the distance, cattle grazed. Birds sang in the trees that had begun to grow back from the burned stumps. "You know what the strangest part of this is?" Thomas said. "The fire that destroyed your ranch was the worst thing that could have happened to you. And yet, without it, my grandmother's memory would have stayed lost. Without it, all those families would never have recovered their histories. Without it, this valley might not have rebuilt. Sometimes destruction is the only path to truth." Marcus nodded slowly. "My wife used to say that God writes straight with crooked lines. Smart woman, the smartest." Marcus looked down into the well, where water glimmered in the depths. The land knew what it was doing. Fire to reveal water. Destruction to reveal preservation. The earth was trying to tell us something. What do you think it was saying? Marcus considered the question, watching a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermal currents. That nothing is ever truly lost. It's just waiting to be found by someone who needs it. Your grandmother needed her family's history back, even if she never lived to see it. You needed that connection to your past. The valley needed a reason to rebuild, to come together. And he paused, his voice catching. I needed to remember why this place matters, why the land matters, why the past matters. After Thomas left, Marcus found himself spending more time by the well, listening to its whispers. The sound of water moving through stone had become a meditation for him, a reminder that beneath the surface, things endure. Other visitors came with their own stories, their own connections to the treasure and to the history it represented. Each one added another thread to the tapestry, weaving past and present together in ways that seemed almost intentional. There was Maria Santos, a curator from Mexico City's National Museum, who identified several of the gold coins as coming from a colonial mint in Zacatecas that had been destroyed in an earthquake in 1810. The coins were considered lost forever, and their recovery filled a gap in Mexican numismatic history. She arranged for replicas to be displayed at the small museum Marcus had established in his barn, with the originals going to the National Museum in Mexico City where millions could see them. There was James Chen, a graduate student from Berkeley studying Spanish colonial trade routes, who realized that the collection of coins represented transactions spanning from Manila to Acapulco to Mexico City to Seville, evidence of the global trade networks that had existed 3 centuries ago, connecting Asia, the Americas, and Europe in an intricate web of commerce. His dissertation on the subject, titled Gold Threads, Tracking Colonial Trade Through the Rivera Treasure, won multiple awards and was published by a major university press. There was Father Miguel Santos, no relation to Maria, an elderly priest from Hermosillo, who had been researching his church's history for decades. Several of the religious items in the treasure, including the jeweled crucifix that had first caught Marcus's eye, had been donated to the church by wealthy families during the Revolution, with the understanding that they might need to be hidden for safekeeping. Roberto Rivera, it turned out, had been acting not just as a friend, but as an agent of the church, protecting sacred objects from being destroyed or stolen by various revolutionary factions who saw the Catholic Church as an enemy. Each discovery, each connection, each story added depth to the simple narrative of man finds treasure in well. It wasn't simple at all. It was complex, layered, profoundly human. It was about trust spanning generations, about faith that the Tenelent future would honor the past, about the way history lives in objects and earth and water, waiting to speak to those willing to listen. The ranch became something of a pilgrimage site. Though Marcus resisted that label, people came not just to see where the treasure was found, but to touch the well stones, to stand in the spot where fire met water and revealed truth. They came to feel connected to something larger than themselves, to history and legacy and the enduring power of the land. Marcus installed a small plaque near the well, bronze letters on stone. Here stood, Roberto Rivera's well, built 1893, keeper of secrets, provider of life, revealed by fire, sustained by water. The earth always remembers. On the first anniversary of the fire, the community held a celebration at the ranch. It wasn't a somber memorial, but a festival of renewal. Everyone who had been affected by the fire came: the families who had lost homes, the firefighters who had battled the blaze for days, the volunteers who had provided relief in the aftermath, the contractors who had helped rebuild, the neighbors who had supported each other through the darkest times. Marcus stood on a small stage, built near the well, and looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces, young and old, reflecting the valley's diversity. Mexican-American families, who had been here for generations, newer immigrants, Anglo families, Asian families, all brought together by shared loss and shared renewal. He saw Thomas Blackwood, who had flown in from Arizona with his wife and adult children. He saw the museum curators and historians who had become friends. He saw Harold Jensen, standing proud despite his years. He saw his neighbors, some of whom had rebuilt with help from the foundation he'd established. And in the front row, he saw Sofia and Miguel and their children, Elena's legacy living on in their faces. A year ago, Marcus began, his voice amplified by a simple sound system. I stood where you're standing. Now, looking at ashes. Everything I'd built, everything my father and grandfather and great-grandfather had built, was gone. I thought the land had given up on us. I thought the fire was an ending. I thought I had nothing left to live for. He paused, his voice catching. Sofia's hand went to her heart. But I was wrong, Marcus continued, his voice stronger. The fire wasn't an ending. It was a revelation. It showed us what was hidden. It brought us together. It reminded us that what matters most can't be burned. Not family, not community, not history, not love, not the connections that bind us across time and distance. He gestured toward the well. My great-grandfather built this well to provide water in drought. He probably never imagined it would provide so much more. He hid a treasure. Yes, but the real treasure was his faith. Faith that the land would endure, that truth would survive, that the future would honor the past. Faith that when the time came, when we needed it most, the earth would remember and provide. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. A gentle breeze moved through the valley, carrying the scent of green things growing. So today, we don't just remember the fire. We celebrate what came after. We celebrate every family that rebuilt, every neighbor who helped a neighbor, every connection we discovered to our shared past. We celebrate the earth itself, which took everything from us and then gave everything back, transformed and renewed. He raised his glass of water drawn from the well that morning, cool and clear, to Roberto Rivera, who trusted the earth with his secrets, to Elena, who taught me that the land provides for those who care for it, to the land itself, which never forgot, and to all of us, who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you truly have. Salud! Salud! The crowd echoed, voices rising in a chorus that seemed to shake the sky itself. The celebration continued into the evening. There was music, a mariachi band playing traditional songs, a country band playing later as the sun set. There was food tables laden with dishes from every culture represented in the valley, a feast of diversity and unity. There was dancing, children playing, old friends reuniting, new friendships forming. As evening fell and the party continued, Marcus slipped away to stand alone by the well. The setting sun painted everything: gold, the new buildings, the green fields, the faces of people laughing and dancing. It looked nothing like it had a year ago, and yet it felt exactly the same. The essence of the place, the soul of it, had survived the fire. He felt a presence beside him and turned to find Sofia. "You did good, Papa," she said softly. "We did good," he corrected. "All of us, the whole valley." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to music and laughter drifting on the evening breeze. The sounds of life, of community, of hope. Finally, Sofia spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said in your speech, about great-great-grandfather having faith that the future would honor the past." She looked at her father, Elena's eyes staring back at him. What if he did know? What if he somehow knew that one day the ranch would face destruction, and the well would provide not just water, but salvation? "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Think about it, Papa. He chose the perfect hiding spot, deep enough to be hidden, but not so deep that it could never be found. He sealed it in a way that would only be revealed by dramatic geological change, like the kind of pressure that fire and heat create. He left his name carved where only someone who descended into the well would see it. It's like he was leaving a message specifically for his descendants, specifically for a moment of crisis." Marcus considered this. Was it possible? Had Roberto Rivera, facing his own crisis during the revolution, anticipated that someday his family might face another crisis? Had he hidden the treasure not just to preserve it, but to preserve them? Had he understood, in some way, that the land itself would know when to reveal what it held? "Your mother would have liked that theory," Marcus said finally. "She always said your great-great-grandfather was the smartest man she'd never met." Sofia laughed, the sound bright and free. "She did say that." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something softer. "I miss her, Papa, every day. I wish she could have seen all this." "She did," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "In her way, she's been here through all of it. Every decision I made, every time I thought about what to do with the treasure, I heard her voice telling me what was right. She's in the foundation we created. She's in the scholarships. She's in the museum that's teaching kids about their history. Elena's here, Mija. She's in every part of this place." As if, in response, a sudden breeze rustled through the valley, carrying the scent of earth and water and growing things. Both Marcus and Sofia felt it, a presence, a blessing, a confirmation that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. The celebration continued late into the night. When the last guests finally left, and Sofia and her family had retired to the guest house Marcus had built specifically for their visits, Marcus took one final walk around his land. He walked through the pastures where cattle grazed contentedly, their dark shapes peaceful in the moonlight, past the barn where preserved artifacts told the story of the treasure's discovery, coins and jewelry under glass, photographs of the excavation, copies of the historical documents, through the garden where Elena's herbs grew again, planted from seeds Sofia had saved, their fragrance sharp and sweet in the night air. And finally, back to the well. He sat on the stone, a wall, his legs dangling over the side, exactly as he'd done as a young man decades ago, exactly as his father had done before him, exactly as Roberto Rivera probably had when the well was first built. The moon was rising, full and bright, casting silver light across the valley. Everything was still and peaceful and perfect. "Thank you," Marcus whispered into the night. "Thank you for the fire that destroyed and the water that revealed. Thank you for the pain that taught me what mattered. Thank you for the loss that showed me what I still had. Thank you for remembering when I had forgotten. Thank you for providing when I had nothing. Thank you for this life, this land, this legacy." From deep within the well came the soft echo of water moving through stone, a sound that had been constant since 1893, that would be constant long after Marcus was gone. It was the heartbeat of the land, the pulse of history, the whisper of all those who had come before and all those yet to come. Marcus Rivera understood, sitting there in the moonlight with the sounds of life around him and the weight of history beneath him, that he wasn't the owner of this land. He never had been. He was its keeper, its steward for a brief moment in time. The land had been here before him and would be here after him. His job wasn't to possess it, but to honor it, to listen to it, to trust it, to provide what was needed when it was needed. The fire had taught him that. The water had proven it. And the treasure, not just the gold, but the connections, the history, the stories, the renewed community, the restoration of memory and legacy had been the gift of both. He climbed down from the wall and placed his palm against the stone one more time, feeling its warmth retained from the day's sun, feeling the cool dampness of the water below, feeling the life within it, the ancient life that connected past to present to future. "I'll take care of it," he promised, "until it's someone else's turn. I'll take care of it the way you took care of me." The well whispered its acceptance, water murmuring through ancient stone, carrying messages from past to future, from fire to rebirth, from loss to discovery, from ending to beginning. And in that moment, Marcus Rivera felt complete peace, the kind that only comes when a man knows his place in the world, not above it, not separate from it, but woven into its fabric, a part of its eternal cycle of destruction and renewal, death and life, fire and water. The ranch had survived, the treasure had been shared, the history had been honored, the community had been healed, the land had provided, and the well, faithful keeper of secrets, stood strong through it all, reminding everyone who approached it that the earth never forgets, water always flows, and truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually rise to the surface when the time is right. As Marcus walked back toward his house, toward his bed, toward tomorrow, and all the tomorrows that would follow, he carried with him the profound understanding that had come from his journey through fire and water, that endings are really beginnings, that loss can become discovery, that the past reaches forward to save the future, that family is measured not in bloodlines but in trust spanning generations, that wealth means nothing compared to legacy, that the land provides for those who care for it, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places we look at every day, waiting patiently for the moment when we're ready to truly see them. The fire had come to take everything. Instead, it had given back more than was lost. And the well, guardian and provider, keeper of Roberto Rivera's faith and Marcus Rivera's salvation, continued its eternal watch, stone and water, past and present, holding fast to the truth that the earth always, always remembers. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. Think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.